Imagine sitting by a flickering campfire tens of thousands of years ago. The night is pitch black, the forest alive with whispers and snapping twigs. Suddenly, a chilling howl echoes through the darkness. Too deep for a wolf, too human for comfort. Your tribe huddles closer, convinced the sound belongs to the monsters that stalk the edges of human memory. Were they real? Prehistoric predators we've forgotten? Or legends born from fear? These are the stories of creatures our ancestors swore they saw, half beast, half human, the ancient survivors who haunted their world. Picture this: the Stone Age world where survival was measured in hours, not years. Nightfall was not peaceful. It was terrifying. For our ancestors, darkness was alive. Every rustle in the grass could mean a predator. Every shadow might be hiding. Eyes, and it was here, under the constant pressure of danger, that the very first urban legends of monsters were born. Humans are storytellers by nature. But back then, stories weren't for entertainment. They were tools around the fire. The elders spoke of creatures that lurked just beyond the safety of the flames. Enormous wolves with glowing eyes, ape-like shadows that stole food, and clawed beings that waited in caves. Were these tales real? Perhaps, but one thing is certain. They carried warnings. Think about it. How do you convince a restless child not to wander too far from the tribe's fire at night? You don't give a lecture about predators' invisibility. You tell them, out. There in the dark, monsters are waiting. And so fear became survival. But legends also did something more. They bonded groups together. When people shared the same fear, they shared the same caution. And the monsters our ancestors imagined became part of the invisible wall that protected them from real dangers waiting outside the circle of firelight. The power of these legends grew because they weren't just empty threats. Early humans lived side by side with predators we can barely imagine today. Lions twice the size of those we know, cave hyenas that hunted in packs, giant bears towering over men, and even sabertooths with fangs like daggers. To an ancient hunter, these beasts weren't myths. But here's the twist. Sometimes the line between real animal and imagined monster blurred. A fleeting glimpse in the dark could transform into something larger than life. A roar heard from miles away might echo as the voice of a supernatural creature. Fear filled in the blanks. Over generations, these exaggerated tales hardened into truths. A claw mark carved into a tree wasn't just a predator's scratch. It was evidence of a forest demon. A shadow moving across the plains wasn't just another tribe. It was the dreaded wild, men who came to steal fire, and each retelling made the monsters more terrifying, more convincing in a way. This storytelling instinct was genius. It gave humans an edge. If a tale made you cautious, you survived. If you ignored it, you might not. Myths weren't just entertainment. They were genetic insurance policies whispered into the ears of every new generation. If you step into a prehistoric cave today, you don't just see animals painted on the walls, you see evidence of fear, reverence, and imagination. The bison, mammoths, and lions drawn in flickering torchlight weren't only trophies of the hunt. Many scholars believe they were warnings, or even spiritual guardians against the monsters of the dark. Imagine the ritual. Before a dangerous hunt, the tribe gathers in the cave, chanting, painting, retelling the stories of beasts both real and imagined. The act itself gave them courage. By giving shape to their fears, whether as towering beasts with human faces or shadowy figures with claws, they made the unknown just a little more knowable. This wasn't just about scaring children anymore. It was about survival psychology. Legends created a framework. This is how you explain the unexplainable if a hunter vanished. It wasn't simply bad luck, it was the monster in the forest. If a child grew sick, it was the curse of a creature you couldn't see. These stories filled the terrifying gaps in early human understanding. And so, long before the first written myths, long before civilization, the monsters were already with us, not as fairy tales, but as constant companions, shadows that stalked the edges of firelight, shaping how our ancestors lived, feared, and even believed. For ancient humans, the world wasn't divided into categories like real and imaginary. Instead, everything lived on a spectrum of possibility, and on that spectrum, were creatures that blurred the line between predator and legend. Survivors. From another age, monsters that felt half true, half nightmare. Take, for example, the so-called wild men of the woods. Across Ice Age Europe, tribes whispered about hairy, human-like beings who lived just beyond the fires they were said to be stronger than any man, covered in thick fur and capable of stealing children or women under the cover of darkness. Sounds familiar? To us, it echoes tales of Bigfoot or the Yeti. But to them, it may have been a distorted memory of encounters with Neanderthals or Denisovans, other human species who looked like us, but not quite. Then there were the giant birds. Some legends spoke of creatures so massive they could swoop down and carry off hunters. At first, this sounds absurd, but fossil records reveal enormous prehistoric raptors and vultures, like Argentavis. With wingspans bigger than small planes, imagine the shadow of such a bird passing over your camp. Wouldn't you believe it was a monster sent by the gods? These weren't fairy tales. They were fragments of reality, stitched together with fear, memory, and the desperate need to explain what lurked just out of sight. Among the most haunting of prehistoric legends were those born from direct encounters with creatures we now know only through bones. Imagine stumbling across the skull of a saber-toothed cat, those impossibly long fangs gleaming like knives. To an ancient mind, this wasn't just an animal. It was a demon with a mouth designed for death. Stories of fang beasts that drank blood echo across cultures, perhaps rooted in the awe these predators inspired. Then there were the cave bears. Towering over humans when they stood on hind legs, they could weigh more than a ton. Evidence suggests humans not only feared them but revered them. Skulls arranged carefully in caves hint at rituals, maybe even worship. For some tribes, the cave bear wasn't just a predator, it was a god, a spirit, of the mountain. Is it any wonder they became the giant guardians of legend? And let's not forget the hyenas of prehistory. Far larger and more aggressive than modern ones, they hunted in terrifying packs. The sound of their bone-crushing jaws in the night must have sounded like monsters gnawing on the bones of the dead. Each of these creatures, saber-tooths, bears, hyenas, were very real. Yet as their bones were discovered, their forms glimpsed, and their power exaggerated, they became something more. The foundation of myths that would echo for millennia. As time passed, humans began stumbling upon the fossilized remains of long-extinct creatures. Imagine the scene. A hunter wandering through a dry riverbed discovers a massive skull with teeth like spears. Without the science to explain extinction, what could he conclude except that these monsters still roamed somewhere beyond the horizon? Fossils weren't relics of the past. They were proof of hidden beasts in Greece. Ancient shepherds uncovered mammoth skulls with a central cavity where the trunk once attached. To them, it wasn't an elephant. It was a cyclops, a one-eyed giant. Elsewhere, enormous bones were taken as evidence of dragons, griffins, or earth-shaking lizards that lurked in caves. Every fossil discovery poured fuel onto the fire of myth. Even misinterpretations of living creatures fed the legend's shadows in the mist, tracks too large to match any known animal. Distant cries, carried by the wind. All of these became evidence. If you already believed in a monster, the world around you provided endless proof. So when people whispered of wild men, blood drinkers, or sky-hungry birds, they weren't lying. They were piecing together clues guided by fear, memory, and imagination. For them, the monsters were not myths. They were neighbors in the dark. And though many of these creatures vanished, their echoes would survive, shaping not only ancient fears but even the monsters we still talk about today. Thousands of years have passed since our ancestors huddled by firelight, but strangely, the monsters never left. They simply changed their names. What once were wild men of the woods became Bigfoot in North America. The mountain demons of Asia evolved into the Yeti of the Himalayas, and the clawed beasts of Europe shifted into werewolves, trolls, and ogres. Different lands, different eras, yet the stories are eerily similar. Think about it. Isolated communities across the globe, with no contact, All told tales of giant hairy men living in the wilderness coincidence? Or is this evidence of a shared prehistoric memory, an echo of the days when multiple human species coexisted, and Homo sapiens were not alone? Even today, people claim sightings. Hunters describe massive footprints in the snow hikers report, guttural, howls deep in forests. Entire expeditions are launched chasing shadows. Skeptics laugh, but believers insist something is still out there. It doesn't matter whether you personally believe in Bigfoot or the Yeti. What matters is that these legends endure because they speak to something deeper, our ancestral memory of fear. Every rustle in the dark, every track in the mud, every chilling scream in the distance, they remind us of a truth our ancestors knew well. The wilderness has always belonged to something bigger than us. Science has tried to put these legends to rest, yet in doing so it may have kept them alive. Anthropologists explain Bigfoot as a cultural myth, born from misidentified bears or hoaxes. Psychologists argue that our brains are wired to spot patterns, especially faces and figures in the wilderness. It's a survival reflex. Better to mistake a shadow for a monster than to ignore a predator lurking in the dark. But here's the fascinating part. Logic doesn't kill the legend. It fuels it. Every blurry photo, every plaster cast of an oversized footprint, every scientific explanation becomes another thread in the tapestry. Doubt breeds mystery, and mystery keeps people searching. Meanwhile, pop culture took these ancient fears and ran wild Bigfoot documentaries, Yeti movies, cryptid podcasts, and endless internet theories keep the creatures alive in modern minds. They've become symbols of the untamed, the unknown, the last reminders that not everything has been mapped, photographed, or explained, and maybe that's the real point. In an age where satellites scan every inch of Earth, where data tracks our every move, the idea that something enormous, dangerous, and hidden could still exist is thrilling. Whether real or not, these monsters represent the last frontier of human imagination. So why do we still cling to these ancient monsters? Why, in an age of satellites, DNA tests, and global exploration, do tales of Bigfoot, the Yeti, or lake monsters still thrive? The answer may not be about the creatures themselves, but about us at the core. These legends speak to something timeless, our fear of the dark, our awe of the wilderness, and our need for mystery. They remind us of a world where humans were not the rulers, but the prey. Deep in our psychology lies the memory of nights spent scanning the shadows, waiting for glowing eyes to appear. Monsters keep that primal fear alive, but there's also a strange comfort in them. They connect us to our ancestors, to the same stories whispered around ancient fires. They remind us that no matter how advanced we become, we are still human, still creatures shaped by fear, curiosity, and wonder. Perhaps that's why we don't want the monsters to disappear, because if they vanish, so does the mystery. And without mystery, the world feels smaller in the end. The monsters that haunted our ancestors still live on, not in the forests or the mountains, but in our imaginations, our fears, and our endless longing for the unknown. From the crackling fires of the Stone Age to the glowing screens of today, one thing has never changed. We carry our monsters with us. Some were real. Sabertooths, cave bears, giant birds. Others were born of shadows, fear, and imagination. Yet, together, they shaped the way humans saw the world. Our ancestors told these stories to protect themselves, to teach caution, to explain the unexplainable. And we still do the same, whether it's Bigfoot sightings, Yeti expeditions, or tales of lake monsters. We keep feeding the legends. Because deep down, part of us wants them to be true. Maybe that's the real secret. We don't need the monsters to exist, we need the idea of them. They remind us that the world is still mysterious, still wild, and still capable of surprising us. So next time you hear a branch snap in the woods or see strange tracks in the mud, ask yourself, are you hearing just an animal, or the echo of a story whispered for 50,000 years? If this journey into ancient legends sparked your imagination, make sure to subscribe for more stories that reveal the hidden fears and mysteries of humanity's past. And tell me in the comments, which monster would you fear most if you lived in prehistoric times?